working? Yeah. All right. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. I've met Peter, I think, about 2 years ago or so. We worked on some little things together. But your journey has started many years ago, and you've been quite the serial entrepreneur.
Right.
Already having exited 3 companies for around 350 million, which that's quite the accomplishment. But so tell us a little bit about your latest venture, CodeStream.
So CodeStream is, so we started CodeStream about a year ago. We participated in Y Combinator in the winter 18 batch. And CodeStream is a service that helps developers discuss, review, and understand code. So it works with the tools that developers use to write software, and just helps them do it more collaboratively, so they can work with each other.
Awesome. But now let's take back a little bit from in that journey, since you've done multiple companies already, and I know a little bit about your background, but tell us a little more about how it all started, and at what age did you start, and how did that amazing journey begin?
Sure. So it's actually, so I'm going to date myself here. So when I was in high school, a million years ago, we had a circle of 9 friends who affectionately referred to each other as the dumb shits. And 3 of us one summer, I think in between our junior and senior year, something like that, we decided that instead of going out and doing all the things that you do in high school, we were going to go into Leo's basement and we were going to start a software company. So we spent the whole summer doing that, never wrote a single program that we finished, but that experience of trying to get a company off the ground, you know, we did things, important things, like we bought a whiteboard. Like, this is really valuable. Everybody needs a whiteboard. And we invested in each other, and we learned what it meant to work together and try to accomplish a goal. And so the reason I started there is because, although that company didn't go anywhere, of our 9 friends, 3 of us are CEOs, and it's those same exact 3 guys that started that company way back then. And so I think, especially for the people who are here at a young age, there's no better time to get started than when you're still in high school.
Yes, that's definitely something I can recommend too, is that it's very good, start early, fail early. And I'm curious, what made you start after you already exited one company? What made you start that next company?
Well, it's sort of the most interesting part of my whole life as an entrepreneur, I'm sure we're going to get to, which is how I started that first real company. But to start the second one, we had gone through so much together. We felt like we'd been at war. And so once we sold the company and all of a sudden we're, you know, it changed our life forever, that being able to exit that company and sell it. We were sitting around saying, okay, well, what do we do now? And we had gone through when the Web 1.0 bubble burst, and we had felt what it was like to have a company that's very successful, and then we felt what it was like for the whole industry to be in a less good place. And so it was basically a no-brainer. I mean, there were 14 of us at the time we grew into a team of 14. We were all working at CBS Sports Line, which is actually down here in South Florida, which is why I live here in South Florida now. And we were like, man, we got to do something better and bigger. And so all 14 of us like quit the same day to start the second one.
Oh, okay. With that, let's dive into a little bit more of your journey. Since, as we said, I think you've been CEO for about 23 years now.
Yeah.
That's quite the CEO journey. And what's been one of your biggest, or let's start with your team, and especially you said there's 14 of you, but I also heard that there's really the core 4 of you.
Yeah.
So I think about 23 years ago when you started the first one of those, tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So my main there's 4 main partners, and we got one new. So 4 of us have been working together for 23 years. The new guy on the team, only 11. So he's, you know, still in a trial period. We're not sure if we're going to go. But we actually met in college, and so this was again a million years ago. And we went to Carnegie Mellon University, which has a computer science program there. So we met. We were a bunch of dorks writing software. And so after we graduated from college, each one of us ended up working on Wall Street. And then, as often is the case, one night over beers, we were talking about what to do. And we all had pretty good jobs, but we knew we wanted a little bit more. And actually the conversation, I won't forget it, as we were talking about Bill Gates, because somebody had found an article that suggested that he would have to spend $3 million a day, every day for the rest of his life, in order to die poor. And so we spent like an hour talking about how could you spend $3 million a day. So this is like, I guess the movie out of this, Brewster's Millions or something like that, right? And after an hour, finally one of us, I forget who, had an idea that basically said, well, why are we talking about Bill Gates' money? Why don't we talk about our money, and how are we going to get to the point where somebody is going to have beers and talk about how to spend as much money as we've made? So that night, a company was born, at least conceptually in our head, and the only thing we knew at the time, we didn't know anything other than how to write software. And one of us, or I guess most of us, had seen the World Wide Web. And so we had a hypothesis, which was that the web was going to be much more important to industry than anybody had given it credit for. Because at the time, the web was nothing. It was 1995. The web wasn't a well-known thing. It certainly wasn't ubiquitous. The only people who knew what the web was were either scientists or computer programmers. And so we thought that eventually that was going to become hugely important. So we named our company accordingly. So it's a wonky name, but it was called Daedalus Worldwide. Daedalus was an ancient mythological feature, but we wanted to have worldwide in the name because we thought that we wanted to sound big, even though it was just a bunch of kids. And we thought that the World Wide Web was going to be profound. And so in starting that company, we didn't know what we were going to build, but we know we were going to do it together. And our first project ended up failing, which is not uncommon. It was an online restaurant guide that today's equivalent would be something like Yelp. But back then, if nobody knew about the internet, restaurant owners were absolutely at the height of red ignorance, right? Like they had absolutely no idea. So when we went around and tried to get customers, like nobody wanted to adopt our platform. But we had some really cool features, like you could actually order online. But of course, like the restaurant didn't have a computer, so what did we do? We printed your order programmatically. We basically created a PDF and then, or no, a TIFF, I think, and then used eFax to like fax it to the restaurant because they took fax orders. And I think like 12 people actually placed an order through our system. After almost a year of doing that nights and weekends, we finally sort of gave up. I think we had dozens of dollars in revenue. And so the next idea was something that also didn't work, but we luckily only spent about a month on that. And then one night, we're sitting around figuring out what to do. We knew that those projects were going nowhere, and somebody had the idea of putting fantasy sports online. So fantasy sports at the time was something that was reasonably popular around sports diehards, but nobody was doing it on the web yet. And so always remember how we got started, because as soon as somebody said, what if we could create a website that allowed you to run your fantasy league? For the next couple of hours, it was just idea after idea after idea after idea of how much this would improve the lives of people who ran these leagues and how much easier the web could make that. And so we were like, totally, this was it. Like this was going to be the thing. So we found out, like literally the next day, we found out that if we signed up for it that day, we could get the back cover of Fantasy Sports Magazine for the upcoming baseball season. And so we thought that would be a good idea for us to advertise our product. There's one problem, which is that we had like a whiteboard of ideas, but that's all we had at the time. We had no name, no logo, no software written, nothing. And so this meant that 4 months from now, when this magazine ran, we would have had to have a finished product that we don't know what it is. So we put together the ad, totally, as my partner says, rectal extraction. And we're like, stats updated daily. We have no stats provider. We said we accept Visa, MasterCard, we had no merchant account. Like, we had no idea how to do anything, but we put together this ad, and we sent it off to be printed, and that became like the functional specification of what we had to build. And then the real challenge hit, which was like, and so now we have 4 months. So we have 4 months, and we know what we have to build, and we all had full-time jobs, so it was like, okay, now we've got to work hard to get this done. And then it became really challenging because a couple of days later, we had an opportunity for Yahoo. They were the dominant search engine at the time before Google really even was a thing, that we could buy the keyword fantasy baseball. So if anybody searched for fantasy baseball, our ad would appear. One problem was that had to start January 1st. So now instead of having 4 months, we had 1 month. So we had to build a product in a month that we had no idea how to build. But we said, why not? So for the next month, I probably slept 1 hour a night, which is very, very difficult to do. And then this sort of like speaks to how little we knew about how the world worked and how business worked, which was the advertisement was scheduled to start on January 1st. And so we assumed that because it was electronic, it was going to start January 1st at midnight. So we were scrambling to get everything done. And so while everybody else was partying for the New Year's Eve party, I was literally with my partner Jim in the back room making final bug fixes and deploying to production, and then like everybody else was celebrating and having fun, and midnight hits, and we all know how the stories can end, but we didn't at the time, which is midnight hits, and we look at our access logs, and there's nobody, right, like 0 visitors, and we had for the first week 0 visitors, and we were like, what's going on? And as it turns out, the web wasn't the magic elixir to drive traffic for everybody, but eventually we got visitors and revenue, and we built that business. It was tough though in the beginning because we had to sacrifice everything to get it off the ground because we didn't know how to raise money, so we didn't have any capital, and so the only thing we had was each other. And although that first month was very, very little sleep, the next few months were not much different. So I was trying to work a full-time job and working on this thing full-time as well. So that maybe allowed for 3 hours a night. But then came a big decision point because I couldn't keep working during my day job because it was just too difficult. And the business had the tiniest hint of promise of maybe taking off, and so we had to make a very tough decision. So I gave up my job, which meant I had to give up my apartment, because I didn't have the money to pay for rent. And so I slept on the floor. We rented, what we could afford was this office that had no heat, no hot water, and this was in Manhattan, which gets kind of cold then.
So I hope you had been through the winter period now.
No, exactly.
Wasn't it around February, March?
Yeah, but that's pretty cold up there. I know in Florida it stays warm. But actually, the decision to leave to quit my company and go sleep on the floor was based on what happened was I was so tired at work. I called my partner Mike and I said, "How are you getting through the day? Like, how can you possibly, make it?" And he says, "Well, I'll tell you what I do. I go to the bathroom during the middle of the day and I take a nap on the toilet." And I said, "That's brilliant. I'm going to go do that." So I go into the toilet, I sit down, and right there is like the toilet paper dispenser. I'm sure everybody's familiar. So it's the perfect height. And there I am taking a nap, and I get up. 20 minutes later, I feel refreshed, I feel awesome, and I go to wash my hands in the sink, and I look up in the mirror, and imprinted on my forehead it says, "If roll is empty, slide cover." I was like, I better go talk to my boss. This is not good. And he actually pulled me inside, and we're like, "This isn't working out." And I said, "Yeah, I know it's not working out." And so gave up my job, gave up my apartment, slept on the floor, and the only thing that gave off heat in that office was actually computers were pretty big back then, and they gave off a ton of heat, so for like a few hours a night you could find Mike and myself curled up on the floor, like our computer at night. And that's why I said, like, once you go through that with partners, and it was I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it was hard, and you had to give everything you had to make the company successful, and we all did it together. And it was a journey, but we eventually were able to find success, and sell that first company, which sort of the end of this part of the story is that as we were selling it, one of the guys at the table when we were negotiating the final deal asked us, so what are you going to do next? And before we could answer, our lawyer answered, and he said, oh, they're not going to do anything different. They're going to keep doing exactly what they've been doing. Now that they've tasted blood, they'll never do anything else. Totally right.
So going into that journey, I mean, it sounded like there were many ups and downs that many of the other founders and entrepreneurs in here are likely familiar with, that it's really a fun little roller coaster ride. What have been one of your, or the biggest, or some of the biggest screw-ups or mistakes that you've made, where you can maybe share some of them that people can avoid, even though product failing is important and default course?
Yeah, well, that's one thing. It took me a really, really long time to understand as an entrepreneur, like the default mode is failure. When you're trying to raise money, it's really hard to raise money. And when you go pitch an investor, the chance of him or her saying yes is very small. So, but that doesn't mean you stop. It just means you have to pitch somebody else, right? So you're going to get a no, and you're going to get another no, and you're going to get another no. You don't need all of them to say yes. You just need a couple, right? So the default is to fail, and then find little pockets of success. So that, from a fundraising perspective, that's very easy to understand. And although it's hard, like personally, you have to. My friend described it as a soul-crushing experience, or a soul-destroying experience, which I think is very true. It's very, very difficult to raise money. But the same is true with business, which is that you'll start a business, you'll have an idea, and you'll build it. It turns out that idea doesn't take off, and you're not like immediately successful because, if it was that easy, everybody would do it. So the first time you'll try it, it won't work quite right. And then you'll try something else, and that won't work. Right? And then you'll try something else. And so you keep trying these different experiments, and some of them will work better than others, but most of them will fail. And I think that's one of the toughest things about being an entrepreneur, is just having confidence in yourself and your team, that despite all of these failures, which are endless, that you have to have confidence that it's okay for all of them to fail. You just need a few of them to succeed. And then you'll establish a business of value with growth, and you can work on optimizing that. But until you find that, most companies actually fail before they find that, what they call product market fit, when your growth starts to take off on its own. I think they quit before they fail, which is the CEO or the team gives up before they've given that idea every chance it deserves.
Very good. Is there any one of those failures or mistakes that nobody ever found out you made that mistake?
Well, I think that the biggest mistake we made, and I'll tell you about one that has a happy ending. So the second business we built was called Multiply. And Multiply was a broad-based social media company similar to what Facebook is today. We actually launched around the same time as Facebook, but when Facebook launched, it wasn't anything like it is today, because it didn't have, for example, a social news feed. So it was really just profiles online that you could look. I could look at your profile, and then your profile, and your profile, but I couldn't see a feed of activity. And so we launched with Multiply with a feed of activity, and that was like our main thing. So it's basically what Facebook is today. And back then you couldn't even put photos on Facebook, so it was a very, very different product. So we had some initial success, but then in that space, as we all know now, Facebook ended up basically destroying all the competition. It was a winner-take-all market, and they beat everybody, including us. And so as we were sitting around struggling to figure out what to do, because we had raised quite a bit of money for that business, and we had a bunch of users, but our growth stopped because Facebook was beating us everywhere. And so we're trying to figure out what to do next, and we finally took a better look at what our customers were doing with our platform. And we knew that they were doing some buying and selling, kind of like Craigslist or eBay, but that was like against our terms of service, so like we weren't allowed to do that. And so we had a lot of discussions, not about how to support those customers, but basically how to get rid of them. because we didn't want buying and selling on our platform because that's not what it was for. And so I think that was the biggest mistake we made, was being very resistant to the customer activity that was happening on our platform. Because once we measured it, we had about 20 million users at the time, and we measured it, and there was about 50,000 of them that were selling online. And we're like, yeah, you know, as a media company, 50,000, an audience of 50,000 isn't a big number. So 20 million, what's 50,000 going to do for us? Even if we charge them like a premium subscription, like get a Multiply Pro, that still wouldn't move the needle. So, and we didn't know anything about e-commerce, so we didn't know what the value was. But then we measured the traffic to those 50,000 profiles, and it turns out it was more than half of the traffic of the whole site. So a very concentrated user base was responsible for what everybody was doing on our service. And so that was like the big mistake, was we didn't know enough about our customers. We didn't talk to our customers about what they were using the product for. Now the reason it has a happy ending is despite the fact that we took way, way, way too long to learn that. Once we could measure it, we asked them, and we put a shopping cart in place and all that stuff, and it turns out about $500 million worth of commerce was transacting on our platform, and we didn't have any idea. So somebody should have fired me because of that.
I know we learned about the concept of transaction fees at that
Exactly. Then we learned about e-commerce and transaction fees and GMV and all those things, and how we can take a sliver of that $500 million. And then we weren't experts in e-commerce, but we found somebody who originally was going to partner with us. But once they saw how big we were, they bought us, and that was a happy ending for the company. At a time where we thought that we were doomed, because 2008 financial crisis had hit, we weren't able to raise more money, we were losing money every month, we were running out of cash, and this was the sort of the savior.
Sounds like a very saving pivot. It's in a good direction.
It was awesome, and even post-acquisition, that went pretty well for a while, although Multiply.com doesn't exist.
Another startup in a startup radio.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the things that the entrepreneurs in the audience would like to hear. And for that, let me first ask, who in here is an entrepreneur? Started a startup, runs a small business, anything in the realm? All right, yes, sounds good. You mentioned Y Combinator earlier. What are your thoughts on accelerators and incubators and the like? Some pros and cons that could help the entrepreneurs in here in the evaluation of should we apply, should we not, what should we do?
So you will have to go far and wide to find somebody who isn't a bigger fan of Y Combinator than I am. Huge fan. And the reason is they really have something special. So I think other incubators and accelerators have some value. But Y Combinator, I think it's been pretty well established that they're the top accelerator. And because of that, Accelerator have now become the way to launch a business. And a lot of the top businesses, not familiar with Y Combinator, they're responsible for Dropbox and Airbnb and Reddit and Stripe, and you go down the list, and many of the big internet brands that you know came through Y Combinator. And it's becoming such a phenomenon that every year, or every 6 months, they get the applications of the most promising startups. They pick the best ones of those, and because they have the most promising startups, they attract the best partners and the best investors, which means they get the best applicants, which means they get the best partners, which means they get the best investors. And so it's just this virtuous cycle that's feeding on itself. I originally was very hesitant about applying because as somebody who had been doing startups for many years, I didn't feel like I had a lot to learn from like a beginner accelerator, but I was wrong. I was very wrong. I still had a ton to learn. But much more than just learning how to start a business, it's just being surrounded by a whole group of peers who are trying to do the same exact very difficult thing that you're doing, and you're all trying to solve very similar problems. You can help each other, and even just having a peer group. And I think that's one of the, they say that the number one rule in Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. The number one rule of being a CEO is it's really really hard. And nobody talks about it. And I don't know why nobody talks about it, but if you can find other founders or CEOs that have been through it, that can help immensely. And I'll share one other story that was very impactful for me, is that you guys have heard of something called the Entrepreneurs Organization, or EO for short. They were founded because there were, and I might get some of these details wrong, so don't quote me exactly, but they were founded because 5 best friends, one of whom was a startup CEO, they hung out all the time, and one day one of them committed suicide. And in going through the process of dealing with that, they found out that his business was failing, and that's why he committed suicide. And so the other 4 surviving friends started EO to make sure that never happens again. And the whole purpose of the organization is to put CEOs together to be able to share the grind, as it's called, and to be open about the challenges and the stresses about being a CEO. But I think that a lot of people who start companies quit because it gets hard. And all of the successful CEOs out there, it's never easy for anybody. There isn't a single business that you know of today that from the first day they just had runaway success. There are always challenges, and the number one thing that you can do is don't quit. And to do that, you need support.
With that, so because it is a very common thing that CEOs of companies don't have anybody to share their struggles with. You don't know what to tell your investors, really. You don't know what to tell your employees, because neither one of them running away. Who would you recommend then for entrepreneurs to share those struggles with?
Well, that's one of the big benefits of an accelerator, is that you'll be with people like that, and if not, find places where you can meet other CEOs, and even if it's just an email or, hey, listen, I'm going through something, can we meet up for a beer? You'll find that other people that go through it are very receptive to that, and I'm certainly very receptive to that. Anybody that knows me who's tried to start a business, because you understand how difficult it can be. And it's not only the hardships. Like when something happens that's great, there aren't that many people that can really understand what it means to raise a Series A and celebrate that with you in a way that acknowledges the accomplishment. Because you tell other people and they just see the dollar figure and they say, "Oh, that's a lot of money. How did you get that?" But there's a ton of work that goes into it.
And I think that's one of the valuable parts also in building this community, coming together here with Startup Grind, to have those meet those peers, to share the struggles, share the successes with that are in the same startup community.
Definitely.
On another note, since you mentioned your founders, selecting those co-founders and trying to make can often be a struggle, and where people come either first finding them in the first place or then sticking together with them. It sounds like you've had, you guys only 11, but the rest of them 23 years, that's quite a long marriage.
Yeah.
How did you guys start selecting, since that's probably something very valuable for the rest here, selecting those co-founders? What were your criteria to pick out, who am I going to spend the next 23 years with?
It's interesting.
Wedding is coming up.
So there are people that have a lot more experience doing that than me, because I was so lucky and I've been working with the same guy, so I really only picked co-founders once. So it's kind of interesting that the people who are successful at doing that have the least experience, so I can tell you what worked for me, but don't take it as advice because it might not work for you. But it was, as I mentioned, we went to school together and we got to know each other as friends first. And so I think one of the most important criteria is make sure that you are working with somebody who you know and respect and get along with, because there are going to be difficult times, and it's tough to go through difficult times with somebody who you don't like and who doesn't like you. So some people will give you advice that says don't go into business with friends, and I think they're wrong, because it certainly can work. But sometimes it doesn't, and I think it's important to separate out the business side from the friendship side, because it obviously can go south, and the best way to avoid any really bad blood is to have written down on paper what your agreement is with your co-founders, and that means, you know, founders' documents and equity splits and all that sort of things, because it gets really bad when you don't have that written down, and then people have different expectations of, oh, what if I quit, what do I get, and then you end up, that can ruin friendships. But because we had another co-founder that worked with us for a little while and then didn't, but because we all knew the deal, I'm still very good friends with them, and that's obviously important.
Are there any of those sort of things that you would want to share with the audience on good advice when starting your own startup?
Well,
I've done it a couple of times. So.
Yeah, I think if the hardest thing to do is stick with it when things go bad. What might be even harder than that is to get started, and to really get started. And I guess the advice I always give to people is that in order for the startup to be a thing, when it's just an idea in your head, you're not spending on any time on it, that's not a startup. When you're doing an hour a week playing around with, you know, building a website or whatever it is, that's still not a startup. When every week you're spending more time than the last week, and it's filling your every thought, and you're in the shower washing your hair and you're having ideas, that maybe you can call it a startup. But there's a really important inflection point where when you're working with somebody else that's doing the same thing, that's a huge milestone. And the next huge milestone, which is the biggest milestone in my mind, is that when the startup would continue even without you. And that's ultimately your goal. If you can get there, I think that's a milestone that often isn't celebrated, because it's hard to really know when that happens, but that's when your startup's essentially alive and not just like, you know, dependent on you. So I guess my advice to get a startup off the ground is just make sure that every week you're doing more on it than the week prior.
Are there any other questions that you would say you should consider before starting up a business, anything?
I guess my only thing is that, and I'm harping on this quite a bit, but I think it's because it's true, is that there are some people that naturally make great leaders. There are some people that do different types of jobs well. Some people are super empathetic, some people are very articulate, some people... I don't think you have to be anything in particular to be a founder of a startup, except for one thing: you need to be tough. And you need to have the ability to take on stress without it crushing you. And so one of my very close friends wanted to try his hand at starting his own business. And I told him in a moment of candor, I said, listen, you're like one of my absolute best friends. I've known you for so long, but you're not going to win. Because it wasn't for him. He was an anxious guy that was always concerned about everything, and he just didn't have the right temperament to start a company. So I think that any personality type will work, and any skill set could work, as long as you're willing to accept the grind, which can be very, very hard.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I think with that, it's time to turn it over to audience questions.
Yes.
Sounds good.
So,
and also, if there are any engineers here, in case you want to pitch any next feature on the wish list of CodeStream, use the opportunity.
Sure.
And if you wanted, I think the intro in the beginning was already pretty good, in case you wanted to add anything about CodeStream.
Cool, yeah.
Before we dive into questions.
I have a CodeStream question. So, when you're using CodeStream, can you see the people's code?
So Google Docs does, well, I use the Google Docs analogy, and there's one thing that we do and one thing that we don't do. The thing that we don't do is, it's not a cloud-based editor where we're both working on the same file. It's not that. Which makes what we do...
Can we back up and define what CodeStream is?
Sure. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think I said it like 3 times before getting up here, so I may have not said it while I was up here. So what does CodeStream do? So we're a set of tools that make it easier to collaborate on code, And the easy analogy is just like in Google Docs, where you highlight a sentence and add a comment on it, and we can both share in context the thing I want to change. Well, engineers right now don't have that capability. So if I'm looking at my editor, I'm looking at some code, it's actually not that easy for me to comment on it and ask a question and say, how does this work? Because there's no facility for me to do that from within my editor. I have to copy and paste somewhere else. And the challenge there is that in copying and pasting somewhere else, I've done two things. One is I've lost the context of what I was looking at. So now I have to go tell you what I was looking at. In this repository, in this file, on line 300, when I paste in the code, and then you'll know what I'm talking about. But the second and perhaps more important thing is that once I ask my question and you answer my question, well, now that question and answer, which explains how this code works, well, now that lives over there. And it's in Slack, or it's in email, or it's in something else, but it's not in my code base. So what CodeStream does is two things. One is it makes it easier to ask that question. So in my editor, while I'm writing code, I can just select whatever code I have a question about and type my question right there. And that makes it easier for you to know what I'm asking about because it's attached to that code and you see it. It's like Google Docs. And the second thing it does, which is really where we provide value, especially for larger organizations, is that that question and that answer get saved with that code. So now a new developer who joins the team 6 months from now, they get to see not only the code, but all the conversations that have taken place about that code. And so ultimately, the way that we think about this, why this is so different than what exists today, is that we all know, for anybody here who's a software engineer, if you remember written code, you know that documenting or commenting your own code is something that we all know we should do. Raise your hand if you do it really, really well. No hands.
I use comments to remove things.
Yeah. So the reason I think, and we've been giving this a lot of thought lately, the reason I think that nobody comments their code well, is that as a developer, the code that I write is clear to me because I wrote it. And so I don't know what question you're going to have. I can't necessarily anticipate your question, so I document what I think people will have questions about or what I think might not be unclear, but I can't predict that, so I don't know. I'm not efficient in answering the questions that are unasked, and I'm writing documentation that will benefit somebody who knows when, like a year from now, 2 years from now, so I have to put my effort in today when the value I'm going to get from it isn't until way down the road. So CodeStream sort of turns that upside down, and instead of me pushing documentation to the rest of the team, not knowing if it's going to be helpful, CodeStream allows you to pull documentation from each other by just making it simple to talk about code. So I can ask, hey, why does this return null for me? And then you can answer the question, and now that documents the function that you wrote much more easily, and now the important part is that that question and answer gets saved with the code, so now the next person can benefit too.
And which editors do you currently support?
We're working hard. Marcelo's here, my teammate. He's going to be working on a JetBrains version very shortly.
Ooh, yes, finally.
But today we support VS Code. Literally, like next week, we'll support Visual Studio, and we have Atom coming very soon. And with those four, Sublime is later, but I can't say exactly when. One of the things that we recognize is that, especially for larger teams, two people will be using Sublime and one JetBrains, there's a lot of different, and first of all, CodeStream works across those editors, so you don't all have to use the same editor. But the same thing that I learned, because we're so deep into the IDE world today, is that the differences between IDEs are actually a lot less than people might think. And I used to be like religious about Emacs. Like you could not take Emacs away from me for anything. But now switching from VS Code to Atom to Sublime to whatever, they're all the same. I mean, they're not the same, but they can all. But and I think that when we talk, because I've spoken to something like 1,500 development teams in the last year, and what people often say that they need this particular editor for a reason or a set of reasons. they often just don't know that that other editor does the same thing. You just need a different package that has a different name, or you have to set it up differently, or whatever it is. Which is okay. And they're like used to it, like VI key bindings or whatever, but you can get that now in any editor.
Thank you. Alrighty, now other questions?
Did you answer my question?
Oh, okay.
That was the preamble.
The preamble of the question. Okay, good. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, so when who can see the comments?
So, so who can see the comments? So the way that we do it is that, so the way editors work, the way programmers work is that I'll have a version of the code checked out and you'll have your version of the code checked out. So one of the things that we do that's kind of magical is that we'll let me comment on code in my editor, even though you're looking at a different version of the same file, because we might be on different branches. And so if I'm asking about a particular function called foo, that might start on line 300 for me, but because you've got some local editor, different branch, different version, whatever, that might start on line 400 for you. And so when I edit my comment, we have to line it up. So we do that. It's not easy. Also, Marcelo wrote that code, so rest Marcelo. But who gets, so that's the first thing that's a challenge. And then in terms of who gets to see that, by default, well, we leverage Slack as your back end if you want. You don't have to use Slack, but if you use Slack, it's much easier that way. If you don't use Slack, we have our own back end that works exactly the same. That's just not using Slack. So the short version is you get to select which channel you want to add that comment to. So if you're you don't want anybody to see it other than your teammate, you can just DM your teammate that question and get the response. But what we try to encourage is that you do it in a public channel, because then other people can see it and benefit from the answer when you get the answer to your question, whatever it is. So if you really want to, you can keep it private, but you just leverage the same grouping constructs that you're familiar with in Slack.
Does this get saved into the version control?
So it doesn't, and I'll tell you why. So first of all, we're using Slack channels, and so really it gets saved to Slack, which is not under the same version control, right? And why that makes sense is that when we talk back and forth, like it's real time, just like Slack is, where you and I can just have a conversation, blah, 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 blah. Imagine how bad it would be if every time I wanted to send you a message, I had to commit and push, and then you had to pull just to see my latest message, right? That wouldn't work. And you answer my question, commit, push, and then I have to pull to see your answer. So the cadence or the frequency of communication is very different than the cadence or frequency of code changes. So for that reason, it didn't make sense to save it in your repo. I wish that Git had the ability to do things like this that are sort of out of band of coding changes, but it doesn't. And so rather than changing Git and forcing everybody to use sort of our patch version of Git, we just do it the simpler way, which is to use existing messaging solutions.
Any other questions?
You mentioned entrepreneurs organization as like a support type of thing for entrepreneurs. Can you talk more about that? Where to find it? How to get involved?
So good question. I'm not the best source to answer that, other than look it up online and find a local chapter. So they do have local chapters here in South Florida. I was a member of the chapter. The way it works is that you go through some sort of training where you participate in a new class of people that join the organization, and they have the framework, and they walk you through it, get you together, and then they put you in what they call a forum, which is a group of 10, usually, CEOs. And then you meet, most of what you do is actually just meeting the 10 of you with guided direction. But I'll give you an example of one of the things they do at like the first meeting, which is awesome, and like can't tell you how moving this was. So as an exercise, and some of you may have done similar things, so it's not like it's that type, but as an exercise to get to know each other in your forum, they ask you to take a piece of paper and turn it on its side, and then draw a line in the middle. Everything above the line is happy, everything below the line is sad. The left of the page is you were born, and the right of the page is today. And you're asked to draw a graph of how your life has gone. And wherever there's a peak, label it, what happened, and wherever there's a valley, you label it and what happened. So you go through it and you do that, and you spend like half an hour figuring out what your own draft looks like, and then you go around the table and you share that with your peers. And even though you've just met these guys or girls, one of the big parts of EO is the concept of secrecy and cone of silence. So you know that nothing you say in that room will leave. Because a lot of times, and the reason that that's important, is that a lot of the times that the struggle you go through leads outside of the business into your personal life. I know that I can point to when we sold that company, Multiply, that pivoted to social commerce. That deal was so difficult to get done when we sold that company, it ended my marriage. And that's something that going through alone is pretty difficult, because even my friends couldn't really understand the connection there, because they hadn't been through that. As it turns out, it's a marriage that should have ended a long time prior, and I'm remarried very happy, so it was sort of, it was the catalyst that our relationship was dead anyway, but it's the thing that made me realize that my ex-wife wasn't really there for me. So you go through this thing, and you go through your lifeline, and I've never seen more grown men cry. It's very, very emotional when you go through that, and you share everything. And you share good news, bad news, secrets that you've been keeping inside, and being able to offload that onto people who would understand it is huge.
Yes, first of all, I really appreciate the wisdom that you're giving today. But if you could think back those million years when you were in high school, because in the lane of what I do, I work with teenagers and to really help them, coach them, and train them get to their goals. But in particular, I work with an entrepreneurship program with teenagers. Right. So looking back to yourself and your group of friends, what would you say, what wisdom would you give? Because right now, it's like a lot of focus on doing that business plan and the technical aspects of it, but I know and understand that work-life balance, the stress that it takes, they need to understand that, but what wisdom or what would you say, or you think that they need to know in those teenage years if they're thinking of going into entrepreneurship?
Well, first thing I'll say is that I've never written a business plan, so I'm not the person to, don't do that. So I think one of the reasons that kids tend to not get far enough in their entrepreneurial journey is they spend a lot of time on the stuff that doesn't really matter, rather than really you should be doing two things and only two things. You should be building your product and talking to customers, and that's it. Like nothing else matters. So when you're getting off the ground, just build product, talk to customers. And so getting a product so that you can talk to a customer about it is obviously step one, but even before you have that, you should be talking to customers about what they need. Almost every business you can think of has customers of some sort, right? It's very rare that you build a product that doesn't have customers. So I think just getting into the trenches and actually getting your hands dirty and understanding how all that works, even if there's failures along the way. That's when you get experience. I've never met a successful entrepreneur that attributes their success to a well-written business plan or to a great strategy document or to anything like that. It's all just getting in the trenches, and often it's when you talk to those super successful CEOs, you hear about the things they did that were unexpected and because of some key insight. And so how did they get that key insight? They got that key insight by talking to their customers, usually. And this dovetails with my biggest failure as a CEO, which was not talking to customers, so you can understand I'm a little sensitive about it. But I'll tell you a quick story, which is the founder of Airbnb. If you hear or read about their story, they're a business that failed a large number of times. So now they're like, $50 billion company or whatever it is. But their name is Air Bed and Breakfast, and the reason they called it that, because their original business plan was that they were going to go to people who had houses, who had just some spare square footage, who were going to get an air mattress and put it in the corner, and then rent out that air mattress to, that's where Airbnb comes from. And so the original version of their business plan contemplated them partnering or even purchasing air mattress companies because they thought if they're going to be successful, they're going to have to sell a lot of air mattresses. So when that didn't work, they said, well, that part, Airbnb didn't work, so what about the B&B part? So rather than breakfast, so they would focus on breakfast. So then they tried to sell breakfast to the hosts, and they thought that that was the important thing, because they were fixated on this whole idea that you were going to host people in your home while you were there. That didn't work, although they did have some interesting attempts there. They, around a convention, the Democratic National Convention, because a lot of people came in to attend and they needed temporary housing. So they produced a box of cereal called Obama O's. You may have read about it because it made the national news. So that gave them a blip because they got national coverage, but eventually that didn't work. And it wasn't until they looked at their customer database and find out that the only place that was kind of sort of maybe working but not really was New York City. And so they went to New York City and they went and rented apartments as customers without telling their renters that they're renting to the CEO of the company. And what they found was that the apartments they were staying in were much, much nicer than what they looked like on their website. So they, as a free service to the people who listed in Manhattan, because that's where they had any activity, they got a digital camera, they knocked on the door and they said, hi, I'm a professional photographer for Airbnb, I can come to photograph your apartment. Of course, they weren't their professional photographers, it was them. And they went around and they took a bunch of pictures to improve the look of the listings of their own customers. And that's when everything took off. So it was that key insight that like having better photos on your online listings is what drove customers, because that's what they needed. There's a million stories like that, and almost every story you hear about the successful companies, there's some little nugget like that that the CEO will tell you attribute your success, and I'm no exception. I'm not going to bore you with even more stories, but that's what the kids need to do, is to get out there and talk to the customers and build the thing and do it.
So what are recommendations from you for, instead of spending time and energy on your business plan, go do what instead? If investors ask for, oh, where's your business plan? Or if advisors ask, where's your business plan? Because I've heard it many times.
Yeah, so I would say, like, focus on results. Like, rather than showing them a business plan, say this is what we're accomplished, this is what we've accomplished, and this is what we're doing next based on talking to our customers. So it's not that you shouldn't communicate anything to anybody at any time, but it should be driven from, rather than like being up on high and like, I'm going to decide what everything that we're going to do, and here's the plan. I think it's important to be humble and recognize that you don't know what the plan should be. I think somebody said, like, yeah, everybody, they're talking about boxing, is that everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Right? And that's what being an entrepreneur is. You're going to get punched in the face every week. So you've got to adapt quickly enough by accepting that input and not having such a high opinion of yourself that you're going to know how the business is going to be successful, because that doesn't work. You have to let your customers tell you that.
Alrighty, next question.
So we're talking about failure, right? That's the kind of underlying the whole thing, right? So when do you know you failed and you need to start something else? Because I've seen a lot where they just keep going. It becomes so emotional that they don't see it. They don't see where they need to stop and do something else.
Well, I think like the best way it was explained to me is that some people, when you raise, especially if you raise money, some people try to optimize. They talk a lot about runway and having how many months of capital do I have? Because business, if you're profitable, then congratulations, you've succeeded. If you're not profitable, then you're losing money and eventually you run out of money, and at that point, you're done, right? So people sometimes optimize for a runway. And in doing so, sometimes they may do things like, downsize the staff to extend their runway. It's rare that time is the thing that's going to allow you to find success. Unless your product is so futuristic, you're waiting for the world to catch up to you, which is pretty rare. It happens, but it's rare. What you should be optimizing for is the number of experiments you can run, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean over a longer period of time. So the more things you can try, the better chance you have of some of them working, enough of them working that you'll find that success and growth. And if you run out of, I think one criteria to answer your question is that if you run out of good ideas to try and you've run all the experiments you can run and you're really deep into the down bottom of the grab bag and can't find anything else and you're like, this is never going to work, then maybe that's the time to reconsider what you're doing.
No more
I
questions?
think there was, you had the question?
Okay,
Any other question? Yeah.
I have one final question regarding that point where you're working full time and then you said, okay, you probably thought you had something going, I'm sure. What was that something that you thought, but you weren't sure that said, okay, you know what, I'll quit what I was doing, although, you know, you weren't efficient at the daytime job or whatever. It was just, you know, you saw that one thing. What was that one thing?
So for us, it was revenue, and not a lot, but so this was back in the early days of the web where you could actually charge people for things. I guess now it's back to that, but there was a period of time where everything had to be free on the internet. But we were charging $300 per subscription for a group of people who play fantasy sports online with our service, which at the time was a bargain because they were spending a ton of time and or money in order to do that. And we had one day where we signed up 5 customers in one day. And so that was $1,500 in revenue in one day. And that was the day that I decided that I could live without my job, because if we could do this, you know, it may not be, because I had a very high paying job at the time on Wall Street, and I knew that it would be a big step down. So to share the numbers, I just think it's ironic, not ironic, but kind of humorous. So I was making around $150,000 a year in 1995, which is more than that in today's dollars, right? And I quit my job, and the only thing we could afford, because I couldn't, you know, that's not a lot of revenue. So he paid me $10,000 a year. So for the next 3 years, I lived off 10 grand a year living in Manhattan, which doesn't allow for a lot of luxury. So it was, you know, when they had 99-cent Whopper sales, that's when I splurged for a Whopper. But other than that, I couldn't afford a Whopper. You know, we had big plates of pasta and ramen noodles and that type of thing. But we did it because we loved it. We were all doing it together. And then, you know, the day of my life that I'll probably remember as much as any other is when we finally sold the company. And you know, I literally had $17 in my bank account. And then the next morning I checked my bank account and there's all these zeros. That's pretty cool.
Excellent. With that, I think.
So I think we're gonna wrap up. And you guys can stay a bit more.
Yes, so stay, enjoy. There's more food, beer, drinks. Enjoy, let's network some more. And thank you very much, Peter, for sharing everything.